Tiffany Young is an assistant professor in English at Jefferson Community and Technical College. She has a doctorate in English pedagogy and technology from Murray State University. Teaching online is her specialty and the place she can totally nerd out. Her English 101 course won the Blackboard Exemplary Course Program Award in 2020. Congratulations for that. Tiffany respects all teaching styles and loves working with faculty on course development. So her title today is Inclusion and Cognitive Load, Understanding the Student Experience. And I'll let Tiffany take it from here.
Hey, well, thanks, Jennifer. I appreciate it. And welcome. I'm so glad to see so many bodies joining. There's always that fear before a presentation, like, what if no one comes? And then, oh my gosh, what if they come? So I'm glad you're here. I don't do anything where it is all on me. I want this to be a conversation and a community learning experience. So I did request that you can unmute to ask questions, that we're going to talk through some things. But I would like to remind you that we do have a lot of bodies here. So please keep it muted if you're not speaking. And I will let the pause sit for a few minutes between items, just so that everybody does have a chance to ask questions or give some input. Well, that introduction made me sound absolutely lovely. Most of the time I'm winging it. And I am a better teacher, not because of all the research or time that I've spent, but mostly because I've gotten to know my students. The student experience is one of the most essential things that I can gather information and then design courses, understanding how students approach my course. So welcome. I'm so glad you're here. There are two main goals in this presentation: engagement through discussion, which is why you're unmuted and have the ability to talk, and learning through experience, because we're going to go through some directions today together and really hash out like what's working and what's not and what we might want to change. This is a guided community discussion with practical implications to course design, and you also will find some good resources at the end of things that can help your course design. So things that we're going to cover today: cognitive load theory, practical implications to course design, and we're going to explore the student experience through all of this. Feel free to raise your hand, put anything in the chat, and I'll definitely pause and ask if there are any questions or concerns, and I'll open the discussion quite a few times today. So feel free to join, discuss, and hash it out. So let's chat today. All right, before we even get started, I want to start with a discussion question. You can both, here in a moment, I'll open up the conversation, and you can both unmute and share, or you're welcome to put it in the chat box. So when you walk into a classroom for an in-person class on that first day, can somebody tell me what you do and what are your students' experience?
This is Jerry Michael Combs from Hazard, and I also teach English. And what I try to do before we do any of the business of class is I try to give students the opportunity to write, since writing is what we will be doing most of the time. So I usually give them a prompt, a sort of an introduction, and let them get their thoughts down on paper. And then later on in the class, as we introduce ourselves, we'll use it.
Awesome, thanks for sharing. Anybody else? What happens when you get there the first day? What do you do?
I'll jump in. This is Stephanie. So I usually just chat with them for a little bit. I make sure I smile at them. I make sure that they know I'm human and friendly and personable, and and I try to make a joke of some flavor, which usually falls flat. But that's what moms do.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple in the chat too about being welcoming, introducing themselves, jump right into an activity, icebreakers. Anybody else want to share something they do the first day?
I see Ruth put in the chat, which I really like, that she has them present 2 things to the class. What scares them most about the class, and what expectations do you have for me as the teacher?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for sharing, y'all. So let's flip it now and let's talk about our online course shells. So the first day when a student opens your course, what do they see and what do they experience?
So this is Stephanie. I'm teaching online, and I love teaching online. One of the things I've learned to do for my students is I do an introductory video. So I do 2 introductory videos. I do one that introduces me, and I do a second one that introduces the course, where I literally walk them through, click here, click here, click here, click here. And then the third thing they get to do is right after they watch the video, they get to introduce themselves on a discussion board.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
This is Jerry Michael again, and I try to have my online courses be as much like my in-person courses. So I do create a video, but in that video, I sort of talk to students as I would if they were my students in class. So during the video, I give them time to write. I talk about the journal that I want them to use to take notes and to do personal writings throughout the course. But I try to make it as similar to my in-person introductory activities as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Any last comments on what you do when, or what happens when a student enters your online course shell and how they experience that? All right, so there's lots of good stuff in the chat too about discussion boards where they would introduce themselves. Excuse me. Maybe a start here module. Lots of videos were mentioned. So we really try to recreate that first day is what it sounds like. We really want students to feel welcomed. We want them to feel like the class is here for them and that they understand the navigation and that they're even developing some community with each other. And I think that is beautiful. And starting the class, I certainly have improved my own course by asking, like, what do students experience? And that's really the lens of what we're going to talk about today. How do students experience your course? And to ask, are they still continuing to get that welcome, that get to know each other, that contact throughout the entire course, and what's happening with the information? I do want to share a quote with you. It is from an article called Organize Your Online Course for Student Success, and it is in the resources if you want to check it out. It says, when you walk into a classroom, you embody everything about your course for your students. You welcome them, explain the course structure, describe the relevance of the content, answer questions and expectations. When you move into an online teaching environment, that communication is mediated by technology. In other words, what passes naturally and directly from you to your students in a classroom now passes into a computer, from a computer to your students. The choices you make about how to organize and label the components of your online course can impact the student learning experience. And that is the focus, looking at how when we switch it, when we go from us to a computer to a student, what can we do to help support that transition? All right, so cognitive load theory has been a helpful approach in designing my courses and just understanding some of the tips and the content of how students experience the course. So cognitive load theory, sometimes you'll see abbreviated as CLT, is just an instructional design theory that explains how we learn and process information. And then why it matters, understanding how students learn and process information helps us reduce the cognitive load through course design. So it allows students to focus more on the learning rather than how to figure it out or how to navigate a course or the content itself of the course. Cognitive load theory was developed by John Sweeler in 1988. There is an article on the resources if you want to check it out. But cognitive load theory is based on a number of widely accepted theories about how the human brain processes and how we store information. The assumptions include that human memory can be divided into working memory and long-term memory, that information is stored in the long-term memory in the form of schemas, and that processing new info results in cognitive load on the working memory, which can affect your learning outcomes. And now that's a lot of theory, but we're going to get to the practical stuff here in a minute. All right, so cognitive load theory, you really want to think of the brain or your brain power as a piece of pie, as a whole pie. And they divide it up into three categories: extraneous, generative, and intrinsic. And you want to think of it as pie because if one piece grows in size, the other has to shrink. And it's important to think about like where your students are putting most of their effort. Excuse me. So intrinsic load is the cognitive work students need to engage in order to process your course material. Extraneous load is the extra processing that occurs when the materials are hard to find or instructions are difficult to understand. And then generative processing is derived from elements that help students make sense of material and process it into long-term memory and complex structures. So we really want to look at reducing the extraneous processing so that we free up some of the student brain and the brain power to really focus on the learning. We don't want students to get distracted by navigating or understanding instructions, or not understanding instructions, clicking through too many places. How do we make the most of their time focused on the learning itself for the course content? All right, so rather than me just tell you a bunch of things, I want to do it together. So I said this was a community learning experience. So what you get out of this PD today is very much how much you want to put into it as well. So before we even begin, I want to look at an example of directions. And we're going to look, because I don't want to favor anybody's subject, how to solve a Rubik's Cube. So let's see, if I click on this, can you see this? Does it take you to the website?
It has not yet.
Okay, let me switch. First, I'm going to put, before I do anything else, I'm going to put the link in the chat so that everybody can go there themselves if you want and pull it up on your screen. So the link's in the chat, and then I'm going to switch to sharing my screen so that I can take us there like the entire screen. All right. Does everybody see on their screen how to solve the Rubik's Cube?
Yes.
Okay. So I want us to spend just a few minutes on this page looking at the directions. So you have the link so that you can scroll around and you can click through this, but I'd like you to take just a few minutes to explore it. See if you can learn in just a few minutes the basics of how to solve a Rubik's Cube. All right, you all. I don't want you to get too far into how to solve a Rubik's Cube. There won't be a quiz, I promise. But I do want to talk about these directions. So I didn't give you anything to start with except here you go. See if you can figure out how to solve a Rubik's Cube. When you open this web page, what are the things you look at first? And Jennifer, I can't see the chat when I'm on this website, so if you could monitor, please, I would appreciate it.
Sure. Lots of comments about pictures and images. Images first, and then noticing that there's a lot of text.
Yeah, so if this was your assignment, figure out how to solve the Rubik's Cube, how would you feel right now?
Lots of overwhelmed and exhausted. Stressed.
Yeah.
Frustrated and not confident.
So how did you all go through this material? Did you click on links? Did you click through slides? Did you scroll down? How did you approach this website?
Scrolling down. Clicked on links looking for an online cube. So I wanted something to put in my hands too. Some people click on links to understand the terminology first. And also scrolling down to see how much there was.
Yeah. Usually, students will get a couple pages and they want to be like, well, how long is this? How long do I need to spend on this? Anybody feel like they learned even a piece of how to solve a Rubik's Cube in that few minutes?
We got a no, learning what the arrows meant, so like the first part of the instructions. Having one in my hand would help a lot.
Yes, having one to hold on to, absolutely. I'm going to head back to the chat just so I can see what's going on too. So this website is overwhelming, right? There's a lot of information. There are links. There's also no real navigation. Do I click through it? Do I scroll down? What do I do with it? And I would imagine if a student enters my English class and they are, particularly if they are one of those students that say, I'm so bad at English or I'm such a bad writer, or they enter a math class and they're one of those students that say, oh, I'm horrible at math. They're approaching it with probably quite a bit of negative energy anyways. So to open up something like this feels very foreign. It feels very uncomfortable and it's overwhelming. So what are some things, if we were going to teach the Rubik's Cube, that we might do just to help support students? Table of contents, some way to put them through steps of how to learn. Priming questions, let them share what they're already good at. Give them a cube, absolutely. Anybody really good at solving a Rubik's Cube? Cut it up in chunks, little at a time. You can actually cut your Rubik's Cube up into chunks too, literally, and look at the pieces. A couple of people are good at it. I learned this when I was teaching tech writing. We were working on instructions, so I set myself up to learn it because that's not how my brain processes. I'm usually overwhelmed with directions that are technical. All right, I want to show you one more thing, and it is a video, but we will not watch the entire video. I'm going to mute before I click over, so I want to make sure I introduce it. It's a video on how to solve a Rubik's Cube, and I want to watch just the first few minutes, and then I'll stop the video there. All right, as I take us there, I am going to mute. So if you can't hear it or it's not playing in just a minute, please let me.
In a recent episode of Almost Impossible, I looked at the limits of speed cubing, an event in which people compete to solve a Rubik's Cube as fast as they possibly can. And in the course of reporting that piece, I actually learned to solve a Rubik's Cube myself, with help from Tyson Mao, co-founder of the World Cube Association. In a little under 2 weeks, using the method Mao taught me, I went from not being able to solve a cube at all to being able to solve it consistently in just under a minute. Now, some of you asked us to post a step-by-step tutorial on how to solve the cube. And maybe you've also heard it said that true mastery of a subject is achieved by teaching it to somebody else. So in the spirit of that maxim, I'm going to show you the method that I used when learning to solve the cube. In this video, you're going to learn the fundamentals of cubing, how to hold and manipulate the cube, how to read cube notation, and how to solve the cube in 8 steps. All you need to follow along is a scrambled cube. Now, if this is your first time solving one, I would budget about an hour plus or minus 15 minutes to your first solve. I know that's a long time, but the more time you spend practicing, the quicker those times will come down, and they do come down pretty fast, at least in my experience. Finally, there are many ways to solve a cube. This is just one of them. It's not the fastest, it's not the best, it's not the easiest by any stretch. It's just the method that was taught to me by a co-founder of the World Cube Association, and the method that I used to bring my times down to under a minute. You ready? Let's begin. So before you move anything, here are some concepts to keep in mind that will make solving the cube easier the more you practice. Number 1, when solving the cube, try to bear in mind that you're solving for pieces, not stickers. What do I mean by that? Most pieces on the cube actually have more than one sticker on them. So if you try to solve a cube by only solving for stickers, you'll quickly find that while you might be able to solve for one face, the other faces won't match. And that's because not all pieces on the cube are alike. There are 3 types. Edge pieces, like this one, have 2 stickers. They look like this. Corner pieces, like this one, have 3 stickers, and they look like this. And center pieces, at the middle of each 3x3 face, have 1 sticker. These center pieces are attached to an axle inside the puzzle, so they never actually move. On this cube, for example, the white center is always opposite the yellow center. The orange center is always opposite the red center.
All right, so I want to talk about your experience this time. What happened when we started the video? So we have some really good comments coming up, that he provided a good intro, that he gave a lot of context, background, that he was engaging. He caught our interest. You felt challenged to try. He was welcoming, and he also talks about how many hours it took him and how long it took him. So that makes me feel better. Like, I understand I'm not supposed to watch this video once and understand the directions. So I think what he does is a lot of what we just talked about we do for our first day. We create videos, we give introductions, we give context, we welcome students. So there's a lot going on in this video that changes things a bit. All right, let me switch back. Keeping in mind like the experience and what's changing, I'm going to switch back to the presentation now. There's more than one way to solve it. Yeah, he didn't come off as an expert in any way. He came off as like somebody who had tried it and was sharing his experience, which I thought was really well done. The intro is long, and especially if you notice that that video is 24 minutes, think about how long a student would sit there. I do not think the video is the perfect example of instructions, but I do think looking at the two in comparison, the video and the article, give you a really good grasp of how students might feel when they enter our online content and what happens and how it's so easy to be overwhelmed. I mean, there's no doubt that all of us could with enough time and effort and the right teacher, learn how to solve Rubik's Cube. But why would we want to do it, and would it be worth it to learn? And that really depends on how the content is presented. So thinking about now, like what we do in our online classes, you really want to think about what can we do as instructors to help support student learning? How can we reduce that extraneous load or extra processing needed for understanding an assignment or navigating content? So what are some things, if you were going to teach this, or you're going to relate it to your own subject, is totally fine. How do you break apart big things like how to solve a Rubik's Cube into chunks that are manageable? What are some tips and things that we can do? So hold off on discussion for just a minute, because I want to share some tips about cognitive load with you first, and then hash out how this actually looks in our course. So some practical implications of cognitive load theory for structuring an online course. So one of the tips is to use a consistent structure in naming conventions for types of assignments that reoccur from week to week. So students really become accustomed to it. There's less thinking and processing about how to understand where to go and what to do. So when we looked at that the article on how to solve the Rubik's Cube, we didn't know where to go. There were links, there were videos, there were images, there were ads. We didn't know what to do. So we talked a little bit about like having that start here. That's one of those things that we can do that helps students understand the structure. Organize your course to communicate the flow of work you would like students to do. So maybe organize folders chronologically. If you want to follow a certain sequence, make sure you're listing them in that sequence. Maybe even give them some of the time like the video did. You know, budget this much time, or you might have to watch the video multiple times. Giving them some of those instructions about what the steps that they're supposed to do is helpful. Make frequently used resources easy to find. If you have instructions for a major assignment or resources that'll be used throughout the course, keep them in sections at the main menu level rather than in a weekly folder where students will have to hunt for them, or link to them in many places so they can easily return. Choose titles for your weekly unit sections that help students understand the structure of your course. So as an example of generative processing, if your course is built around central questions, a series of themes, a theoretical framework, using your naming conventions to communicate the structure, what you want students to learn. So these are some good tips that come out of cognitive load theory for structuring an online course. So let's go back to our discussion and talk about not just the theory of it, but what we actually do and how that looks like. What are the practical implications in our course? So let's go back to that discussion question. What can we do as instructors to help support student learning? And how can we reduce that extraneous load or extra processing needed for understanding assignment or navigating the content? And I did throw up a few examples like using banners or clear titles, templates for consistency. But what are some other things, and even very specific things, that you might do in your course? Consistent formatting. Yes, using a template is one of the biggest things I learned from the KOOL Academy. Deciding on what template it was and then having it repeat so that every discussion board, the directions are exactly the same for all 8 discussion boards or however many there are. Stephanie, tell them why they should care. Absolutely. Make some connections. What's the purpose of it? What do you want them to do with them? Why should they even bother trying? Because even if our directions are really clear and clean, chances are students still feel overwhelmed and a little lost. Give relevance to the chapter in their daily lives. Absolutely. Why is it important? Connected to the real world, connected to other sections in your class. One of the things that I am currently working on, and I am not there yet, is that I am trying to change the verb titles in my course tabs. So under a module, I have learn about and then the subject. And I want to use the language that mirrors what students are doing. So learn about this. They go through and learn about it. I have things that say do this, but I'm still working on a few things. Like when it comes to a major essay, I want the title to say major essay because that's a big part of their grade. It connects to the syllabus, the grade breakdown. But I'm trying to go back and add language that does mirror exactly the student action. And I think that is, another way that we can really help support students to not have to think through what it is. Ruth said, give them time expectations for completion. Yes, I have been resistant to this one. It appears across the board, but I'm resistant because I am a slow learner and I tend to need to repeat and do things more than once. So I'm always worried that I will give too little time and make them feel like they can't do it. But I do think giving them a time that it should take, and then a solution too, if it's taking you longer, consider doing this. What should they do if they are not getting it done? I don't want my students to sit for 4 hours on one assignment. If they can't complete it in a certain amount of time, I do want them to reach out to me, to look at different resources, to take a break and come back. Kim said for tech users, for tech that you use infrequently, include instructions and support. Absolutely. So, giving the time, or even that it might take a repeat. One of the favorite things about the Rubik's Cube video is that he says, you're not going to learn it by watching the video once. You might need to watch the video multiple times. And I think that is really well said, and something that I forget to say to students. Reading an article once maybe isn't enough, especially if it's like an academic article or a scholarly article. Maybe I need to slow students down and say, read the abstract or the introduction and see if you can understand what the main thing is before moving on. Or maybe I need to slow it down and talk a little more about what that process is. Stephanie said, you find that students skip instructions when they are in a hurry? Absolutely. So, what are some solutions that we can do? Maybe some reminders at this point in the lesson or at this point in the assignment, you should have this. Make sure, remind them of the instructions. Having some of those big instructions or resources in the main menu sections so they're easier to go back and find. All of these are really helpful. All right, what about publisher content? This is something that comes up with a lot, and people have very passionate feelings about publisher content. So and I want to discuss, I do not have one answer here. I certainly have how I handle it in my course, but I'm always looking to change it and to see if I can further understand the student experience. So how can we present publisher content in a way that thinks about cognitive load and best supports student learning? How do we present published material, and how do you present it in your course, and how does that impact student experience? And this works for both, like if you are using like a MindLab or a resource for homework or reading or an online book, but it also works for like introducing an article, having students watch a video. How are we introducing outside content in our courses? You are welcome to unmute and share too, if you would like. Sandra says she has one link to the textbook that they access each week. Yeah, especially if we can keep it somewhere that's easy to find. They don't have to go hunting for it, and it becomes a repeat. The action is repeated over and over.
So I embed both the homework assignment, so a quiz from the publisher, and the textbook each time into the weekly modules. At one semester, I had an embedded tutor who really was very familiar with the textbook, and she made a little video how you could read the online textbook. And I had no idea that when you were reading it, that you could have it read to you. And so she showed the students, and I thought that was very effective, that she did it as a peer, and basically said to them, hey, here's how I look at the pictures, and you can have the book read to you at the same time. And yeah, I hope that the students actually saw that, but I thought it was very effective.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for sharing.
Whenever I get a question about how to do something in the publisher content, I make sure to add that to any introductory material I use when I'm first introducing it at the beginning of the semester, because I figure if one student asked that question one time, somebody else probably struggled with it and just didn't ask the question and figured it out on their own. So I only, that's kind of my bar, is like if one student asks a question, I add that to my helpful information about that content.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing. John mentioned in the chat that first thing that they do is make sure that all the material is available, that everybody has access. Absolutely. Especially before you get into something that's weighted, connected to grades. Having something where they make sure they can access things is certainly important and helpful for students. So consider that first website that we looked at on how to solve a Rubik's Cube. Would it have helped if I had added a video that introduced or explained some of the material before you open that website? Would it have helped if I broke it up into parts and I only asked you to read specific parts? Maybe I even took it out of the website, like in a block quote, and put it into my course shell. What if I had asked you instead to work in groups and pick out 4 major components of information and teach the class? What if I asked you to prepare a quick presentation or overview for students? How would any of this change the student experience, and how would it improve the student experience? And I think those are some of the questions that we really need to be asking. Publisher content we chose because it connects beautifully to our learning objectives and what we want students to take away. But when we think about how students experience that, it starts to change how I want to present it. That I want to give a welcome video, that I want to do that stuff that I would do in class before I had them open the book and do something. I want to give my own introduction, do something to make them comfortable with it, explain what I expect, how it connects, then move on to the publisher information. We are almost out of time, so I want to show you one last thing before I open up for questions. The resource page, you can download this. The resource page includes quite a few of really helpful resources. You can't see that. If you click on the first one, let me grab share screen real quick. If you click on the first one, it'll take you to, did I open it? Nope. Hold on a sec. If you go to the resource page, you click on the first one, it'll take you to some infographics that are really helpful with more practical ways in which you can think about cognitive loan theory and different principles that you could apply to your class. And there are some more that connect. They're really well done. They're worth checking out, like voice principle. Sometimes too much multimedia is better. They say that 2 is a good, having both picture and text, having 2 simultaneously works well. All right, let me go back. All right, I love the conversation, so I tend to get carried away with it. But any questions or concerns? Anything you want to share? I do hope that you enjoyed today's session. I hope that you're leaving with a few ideas or at least a few ways that you might reapproach your class, your publisher content, your introductions, and just remember that the student experience is the most valuable thing you can do in thinking about redesigning your course or making revisions. You can download, I think, from this page at the top when we share it. Jennifer, will you share the presentation or is it on the website?
It will all be shared out later. Yes, they will be able to have the presentation later. Yep. And while I have the floor, yeah, thank you so much, Tiffany. That was amazing. Lots of good information. And thank you, everybody, for sharing your thoughts and participating. That's always makes for a great presentation when people feel confident and share. So I just wanted to make a couple of last-minute announcements. First off, we have our pop-up prize winner is Christina Tackett, and this one is awesome. She won a Web-Around Big Shot 56-inch green chair screen, so that's the big screen that goes behind you. So the Office of Online Learning will get with you next week to get you that award, so that is really exciting. And as we said, you will have access to the presentation, and I just need everybody to hop out of the room so that we can finish the recording, even if you're coming back in here for your next session, okay? Thank you so much to Tiffany Young and all of you for attending, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.